Good afternoon. That's pretty good. Let's try it again. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It is a privilege and an honor to be here with you. I'm really sorry that I'm late. Oftentimes when we think about environments, we think about, of course, this beautiful earth that we inhabit that unfortunately our kind is destroying. But it's also the ways in which we create environments in which all of us live and many of us don't. And I got a call this morning that one of my colleagues had been in an incident and was in the hospital. And I didn't quite know the circumstances. I played phone tag with her mother. And it turns out that she was in an Uber on the way to the airport, and her car was hit by 5 bullets, and she'd been shot. And so I will be leaving here after I'm done to go to the hospital to visit. But it's a reminder of the choices that we make, because so much of what we're talking about here at the end of addressing the climate crisis is a set of policies about regulating those things that ultimately go into our atmosphere and destroy our Earth. But that same process by which we have to regulate those things, the externalities of which harm people, that same process is what's broken when it comes to something as simple as regulating something like guns. Now, I know this is not a gun control conference and a gun violence conference, but I do want us to be thinking about the antecedents of what's broken. As somebody who thinks a lot about how government works or government does not work, it is a reminder to me that the antecedents of my colleague being shot in a car by random gunfire in a country where there are more guns than there are people, and all of the carbon that's being put out into our atmosphere every single day that is destroying our climate, that the antecedents of that are the same. And it's the unwillingness to stand up to power collectively to address the externalities of that power simply because a few people have a lot of money to make. Now, I was asked today to talk about climate and health and justice. And it strikes me that the story I was going to talk about today was about a child in the south end of Dearborn who misses an average of 2 days a week of school. Not because that kid is truant, not because the kid doesn't want to go to school, but because that kid wakes up and can't breathe. And that kid goes to a school, the backdrop of which is a factory. And that factory is putting pollutants into our atmosphere. And one of the things I feel like we sometimes miss when we talk about climate change is that it is an abstract process to a lot of folks. We find ourselves trying to explain the science of climate change. The fact that when carbon goes up into the atmosphere, it creates a situation in which light and heat come in, but heat can't escape, raising the temperature at the surface of the earth, driving the process that we call climate change. And we all know that litany. We've said it how many times? And sometimes in rooms like this, when we talk about what the consequences of climate change are, we talk about it in the form of nature. I love nature as much as the other person. Really, I do. Probably not as much as most of you all in here. But there was a whole moment when anytime an article would be written about whatever you want to call it, climate change, climate crisis, global warming, whatever the name is, it's fascinating. I actually teach this in one of my courses. They talk about, The Guardian published this great article. They said, we are going to stop talking about it as climate change because change does not imply crisis. We will be calling it the climate crisis. And the big banner picture was polar bears. Y'all ever met a polar bear? You have? No, have you met one? I've never met one, and I never want to meet one. Like, if I ever see a polar bear, I'm running the other way. Like, they eat their own kids. That's not to say that we shouldn't save them. I'm just saying they eat their own kids. So what's to stop them from eating me? I don't ever want to meet a polar bear. I'd like to watch one, really, like far, far away. And I feel very sad that we're destroying their habitat. But here's the problem with that, is that when we frame the issue of climate change around polar bears, we miss the fact that the greatest damage that any of us can appreciate is the damage that it's going to do to our kids and kids like the little boy I wanted to talk to you about today. Because every ounce of pollution that comes out of that smokestack, before it gets out into the atmosphere to corrupt that, it's sieved through the lungs of that boy and all of the kids that boy goes to school with. And for that reason, this boy finds himself unable to go to that school 2 days a week, meaning unable to learn the lessons taught in that classroom, meaning unable to take advantage of the investment that we make in that boy's education, meaning put behind in life, meaning set behind in terms of the effort to break out of poverty. And that's the story we should be telling when we talk about the climate. That's the story we should be leading with. There are children, our future, who are put behind every single day, and you can see the consequences now. You don't have to wait until some esoteric point in the future. You don't have to wait until the temperature reaches 1.5 or 2.5 degrees Celsius, which means nothing to nobody. You can just go to that boy and ask, should that boy be breathing that air? Should any kid be breathing that air? And I think the obvious answer is no. And so as we think about this, we sometimes forget, because too often, right, in rooms like this, sometimes it's our privilege that does not force us to have to breathe that air right alongside that boy. And I know this is a diverse room, and some of you live in those communities, but too often, the folks who get to write about this in the paper, they don't. So for them, it's about polar bears. For folks like that boy and his parents, it's about everyday life. And as we think about where we're headed today, about the conversation that we're talking about today, it's not just about mitigating the broad consequences of the climate crisis. It's about facing down the power that tells us that climate change is some distant reality and that we can keep on keeping on the way that we have in the past. That it's not here yet, so it's never going to be here. It is here. It's here in the lungs of that little boy that have been corrupted by the polluted air that kid has to breathe because of the same exact antecedents of climate change every single day, and we have to be telling that story. It starts with our willingness to point that kid out and say, that is our child, and we have to treat him as such. Not about polar bears. It's about our kids. So I really, really appreciate you being leaders in this regard, standing up for a globe that cannot speak for itself. But I also ask that as we do this work, we do our part to appreciate the here and now of what's happening because of the same process leading to climate change. And the last point I'll make is this. I didn't expect today to talk to you about a colleague who got shot. I didn't. The crazy thing is I'm about to go to a hospital where she's being treated, and thankfully, she's got good insurance. There are a lot of people who would love to get treatment at that hospital who do not have the same opportunity because it will cost them their financial future. You know why? The same exact system that tells us that the ability of a few to make a lot of money ought to stand in the way of what's good for all of us stands in the way of that health care. It's the same reason we have a gun lobby that's run buck wild over our ability to keep our kids safe in their communities. It's the same reason that we allow gigantic corporations to pollute at the cost of our very earth. And so as we talk about the here and now of climate change, as we talk about the here and now of air pollution, I also hope that we talk about the here and now of the way that corporate money has corrupted our political system that's kept us from actually handling climate change, handling the failure of our healthcare system, handling the failure to stand up to guns. It's all the same work. And we've got to be leaders talking about all of those things. I so thank you for being here, for doing that work. I hope that I get to continue to walk this path with you as you continue to affect the change that you're affecting. I hope that today is an opportunity to continue to think about the language we use, the insights that we bring, the conversations that we're leading. And I look forward to continuing to walk that path. Thank you so much.